You fool! Warren is dead.
Welcome to HorrorBabble. The Deep Ones is a Cthulhu Mythos story by James Wade, first published in the 1969 Arkham House anthology, Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos. In the story, a skeptical parapsychologist arrives at a secluded coastal research institute to assist in a radical dolphin-communication experiment. I hope you enjoy this one. The Deep Ones by James Wade. Diviner than the dolphin is nothing yet created, for indeed they were aforetime men, and lived in cities along with mortals. Oppian, Haliaotica, AD 200. 1. I had never met Dr. Frederick Wilhelm before I went to work at his Institute for Zoological Studies, situated in a remote cove on the California coast, some miles north of San Simeon and Piedras Blancas, not far from the Big Sur area. But of course I'd heard of his studies. The Sunday supplements picked Wilhelm up years ago, which was only natural. What more potentially sensational subject could a journalist hope for than the idea that man shared the earth with another, older, and perhaps more intelligent species, overlooked or ignored by modern science, but with which communication might someday be established? It wasn't a worn-out gambit like flying saucer people or spiritualism, or trolls hidden under the hills, of course. Wilhelm's subject was the dolphin, that ocean mammal glimpsed centuries ago by superstitious sailors and transmogrified into myths of mermaids, sirens, all the fabulous sea-dwelling secret races of legend. Now, it appeared, the superstitions might not be far wrong. Preliminary tests had showed long ago that our ocean-going distant cousins harbored a high degree of pure intelligence and potential for communication, unsuspected because of their watery habitat and their lack of hands or early other prehensile apparatus for producing artifacts. Wilhelm's researches had not been the first, but his speculations were certainly the most daring, and he had parlayed his preoccupation into a career, attracting both government and private foundation funds to set up the institute toward which I found myself jogging in a rented jeep over rutted, sandy roads beside the sinuous green Pacific one starkly sunlit afternoon in April a year ago. Although I knew of Frederick Wilhelm and his institute, I wasn't sure just how or what he knew of me. In a sense, I could easily see how my field, extrasensory perception and telepathy, might tie in with his work, but his initial letters and wires to me had never spelled out in any detail what he expected or projected of our collaboration. His messages, indeed, had seemed at once euphoric and evasive, confining themselves mostly to grandiloquent descriptions of his basic purposes and facilities, plus details on the financial aspects of our association. I will admit that the amount of money Dr. Wilhelm offered was a strong factor in my accepting a job, the exact nature of which remained unclear. As research coordinator of a small Eastern foundation devoted to parapsychological studies overlooked by the Rhine Group at Duke, I had had my fill of skimped budgets and starvation wages. Actually, the location of Wilhelm's experiments gave me more pause than many of the other doubtful aspects of his offer. I confess that I have always had an antipathy to California, despite the little time I recall having spent there. Perhaps I had read too much in the works of mordant satirists like Waugh and Nathaniel West, but to me there has always seemed something decadent and even sinister about this self-eulogizing Pacific paradise. The impression had not been allayed by my arrival via plane in gritty galvanic Los Angeles, or by a stroll through that tiny downtown park where predatory homosexuals, drug derelicts, and demented fanatics of all kinds congregate under the bloated, twisted palms like so many patients in the garden of Dr. Caligari's madhouse. To some, Gothic battlements or New England backwaters represent the apex of spiritual horror and decay. For me, the neon-lit, screaming depravity of Los Angeles filled the bill. These thoughts and others tangled in my mind as I guided my jeep over the rough beachside path, which I'd been assured by the car rental agent in San Simeon would take me unfailingly to the Institute for Zoological Studies. Ain't no place else the road goes after you turn off left at the first orange juice stand. You know, the kind where the stand is built to look just like a great big orange. Just keep on going and don't stop for hippies or high water till the road ends. As I glanced rather nervously around, I could see on my left a sort of encampment of bleached white tents and dark, darting figures down by the wavering face of surf at water's edge. Were these the hippies my guide had referred to? Those sardonic jesters on the periphery of our society, razzing and reviling all the standards and values of 3,000 civilized years? Or had he been spoofing me? Were these only a gaggle of middle-class youngsters out for an afternoon of beachside sun, sand, and sex as a respite from the abrasive grind of our precariously affluent society? Even as these trite and puerile thoughts chased through my head, the vestigial road took a sharp turn over a rise, and I found myself startlingly close up, a zoom lens effect, to what could only be the famous Institute for Zoological Studies. 2. What actually do you know about dolphins, or porpoises, as they are sometimes called? Queried Dr. Frederick Wilhelm, his eyes invisible behind thick lenses that caught the light from filtered globes under gold-tinted shades in his plush office. We had just settled down over a late afternoon cocktail, expertly crafted by Wilhelm himself, after my first rapid tour of the Institute, conducted by its director immediately after meeting my arriving jeep. Wilhelm had been cordial and almost courtly, though it seemed a bit odd for him to start me off on a junket around his establishment before I'd had a chance even to drop my luggage at my quarters and freshen up a bit after the long drive. I put it down to the vanity of a self-made scientific pioneer, jockeying a cherished hobby horse down the home stretch in the big race. The impression I'd received on the whirlwind tour was superficial and a bit bewildering. The long, low, white-plastered cement buildings straggling along the shoreline seemed crammed with more sound, lighting, recording, photographic, and less identifiable computerized equipment than would be needed to study the entire passenger list of Noah's Ark, let alone one minor subspecies of marine mammal. About Wilhelm himself there was nothing odd, though. A big, rumpled, greying penguin of a man. He moved and spoke with the disarming enthusiasm of a schoolboy just discovering that there is such a thing as science. As he hurried me from lab to lab at a breathless pace, he explained, "We'll see the dolphin pools tomorrow morning. Josephine, my research assistant, Josephine Gilman, is working there now. She'll join us later for drinks and dinner." As I had learned from correspondence with Dr. Wilhelm, his senior staff, now totaling 3, himself included with my arrival, had quarters at the Institute, while the dozen or so technicians and laboratory assistants employed here made the trip to and from San Simeon billets in a Volkswagen microbus each day. Now, as I sat with Wilhelm in the dim, richly decorated office over an acridly enticing martini, I heard the bus pull away, and realized that I was alone in the sprawling complex of buildings with its director and the unsurmised Josephine Gilman. "What do you actually know about dolphins?" Wilhelm was saying. "About what any layman knows," I found myself replying frankly. "I know that research started back in the 1950s and indicated that dolphin brain size and specialized adaptations made probable a high degree of intelligence, along with sensory equipment suggesting a possibility of communication with man. So far as I recall, up to date, nothing conclusive has come of it all, despite a lot of effort. I bought Dr. Lilly's books on his research in the Virgin Islands, but all this has happened so fast I haven't gone very far into them, though I have them with me in my suitcase." Don't bother with Lily, Dr. Wilhelm broke in, refilling my glass from a crystal shaker with the etched classical design of a boy riding a dolphin. I can show you things here that Lily never even dreamed of. But the big mystery to me, I had the temerity to interject, is what I'm here for. Do you want me to try and hypnotize your dolphins, or read their minds? Not exactly, Wilhelm answered, after an almost imperceptible pause. At least, not at the present stage. The way I actually plan for you to begin is to hypnotize a human subject, to see whether such a person may become more sensitive to the thought patterns of the animal. We have done a lot of work following up Lily's leads in recording and analyzing the sounds these beasts make, both underwater and in the air. Clicks, bleats, whistles, a wide gamut of noises, some of them above the sound spectrum audible to humans. We've taped these sounds, coded them, and fed them into computers, but no pattern of language has emerged, outside of certain very obvious signals for pain, distress, mating, signals many kinds of animals make, but which can't be called real language. And although dolphins will sometimes mimic human speech with startling clarity, it usually seems to be mere parroting, without real understanding. Yet, at the same time, our encephalographs show patterns of electrical output in dolphin brains similar to those that occur during human speech, and in parts of the brain analogous to our speech centers. All this while no vocalization of any kind is going on, subsonic or supersonic, airborne or waterborne. This led me to a theory that the basic means of dolphin communication may be telepathic, and the conviction that we'll never get in touch with them any other way. I was somewhat taken aback. Do you have a telepathically sensitive and experienced person on the staff, or are you going to hire such a person? I queried. Even better than that, rapped Dr. Wilhelm triumphantly, his twin-moon spectacles jiggling with emphasis. We have a person sensitive and experienced over many months with the animals themselves, someone who knows how dolphins think, feel, and react. Someone who has lived with dolphins so closely that she might almost be accepted among them as a dolphin herself. He means me, Mr. Dawn. Through an open door leading to a dusky hallway stepped lightly the lithe figure of a woman. 3. Glancing sidelong at her across the cozy, candle-lit dinner table, I decided that Josephine Gilman was striking, but not beautiful. Fairly young, with a trim figure, she missed real distinction due to the muddy colouring with rather a swarthy texture of her skin, and especially the staring protuberance of her eyes. Nor was her manner entirely prepossessing. Her melodramatic entrance of Dr. Wilhelm's office that afternoon I could forgive, even with its implication that she had been listening outside for some time. But in subsequent conversation she had proved as much a monomaniac as her employer on the subject of their experiments, and with far less of a sense of humour, a fitting trilby to Wilhelm's benign, avuncular Svengali. But of course, she was addressing me over our coffee. You know all the old Greek and Roman stories about dolphins, Mr. Dawn. How they herded fish to help fishermen, saved drowning persons, and sometimes even fell in love with attractive boys and carried them off to sea on their backs. There's a long history of friendly relations between our species, even though the latter type incident seems based on, shall we say, a misunderstanding. I don't know about that, Miss Gilman, I riposted. From what I've seen in California already, some of our modern youth would try anything once. Surf, sand, and sex, Dr. Wilhelm interjected, like a slogan. I know what you mean. We have some of that type camped out down the beach right now, just south around the bend. Hippies, they call themselves these days. But to get back to dolphins, a more intelligent species, I'm not entirely sure that their good PR, so to speak, through the ages really rings true. Sometimes I even imagine it resembles the way superstitious people used to refer to the fairies and trolls as the good folk to flatter them, out of fear of what they might do. So We get the modern nursery rhyme and Walt Disney type of fairy, instead of the hidden troll races, the menacing, stunted, displaced dwellers that were their real origin. Josephine Gilman picked up a coffee cup and daintily shrugged, as if to express disagreement. "No, Joe, there's something to it," Wilhelm insisted, getting up and lumbering over to a big bookcase in the shadowed corner of the room. "Let me give you an example from a non-Western tradition." He searched for a book on one of the upper shelves. Sir Arthur Grimble was a colonial governor in the Gilbert Islands not so long ago. He visited an atoll called, Butaratari, where there was supposed to be a man who could call dolphins. Wilhelm located the book he sought and fumbled it open. Grimble writes, let's see, here it is. His spirit went out of his body in a dream. It sought out the porpoise folk in their home under the western horizon, and invited them to a dance with feasting in Kuma village. If he spoke the words of the invitation aright, and very few had the secret of them, the porpoises would follow him with cries of joy to the surface. Well, Grimble had him try it. The place was dead quiet that afternoon under the palm trees, the way he describes it, and the children had been gathered in under the thatches. The women were absorbed in plaiting garlands of flowers, and the men were silently polishing their ceremonial ornaments of shell. The makings of a feast lay ready in baskets. Suddenly, wait till I find it, a strangled howl burst from the dreamer's hut. He dashed into the open and stood a while, clawing at the air, says Grimble, and whining on a queer high note like a puppy's. The words came out, Tereki, Tereki, which means arise, arise, our friends from the west. Let us go down and greet them. A roar went up from the village, and everyone rushed over to the beach on the atoll's ocean side. They strung themselves out and splashed through the shallows, all wearing the garlands woven that afternoon. Breast deep, the porpoises appeared, gambolling toward us at a fine clip. Everyone was screaming hard. When the porpoises reached the edge of the reef, they slackened speed, spread out, and started cruising back and forth in front of the human line. Then, suddenly, they vanished. Dr. Wilhelm brought the book to the table, sat down, and finished his remaining coffee. Grimble thought they had gone away, but in a moment the dreamer pointed downward, muttering, "The king out of the west comes to greet me." There, not 10 yards away, was the great shape of a porpoise, poised like a glimmering shadow in the glass-green water. Behind it followed a whole dusky flotilla of them. The porpoises seemed to be hung in a trance. Their leader came slowly to the caller's legs. As we approached the emerald shallows, the keels of the creatures began to take the sand. They flapped gently, as if asking for help. The men leaned down to throw their arms around the great barrels and ease them over the ridges. They showed no sign of alarm. It was as if their single wish was to get to the beach. When the water stood only thigh-deep, the men crowded around the porpoises, 10 or more to each beast. Then, "Lift!" shouted the dreamer, and the ponderous black shapes were half dragged, half carried, unresisting, to the lip of the tide. There they settled down, those beautiful, dignified shapes, utterly at peace, while all hell broke loose around them. Wilhelm's glasses caught the twin candle flames from the table. His eyes were impossible to see. Was this wild account, I found myself wondering, the real basis for his belief in the possibility of man's telepathic communication with dolphins? Men, women, and children, he continued, leaping and posturing with shrieks that tore the sky, stripped off their garlands and flung them around still bodies, in a sudden and dreadful fury of boastfulness and derision. My mind, says Grimble, still shrinks from that last scene, the raving humans, the beast so triumphantly at rest. There, what do you think of that? He closed the book. It seems, I responded, that the islanders made the dolphins the object of some sort of religious ritual, and that the dolphins enjoyed the proceedings. Sounds like something our hippie neighbours might go in for. You're wrong about that part, Josephine Gilman told me solemnly. Those people out on the beach there hate the dolphins. Either that or they're afraid of them. 4. The next morning dawned damp and cloudy. As I breakfasted in the glass-enclosed patio outside my quarters, which overlooked the surging grey-green waves of the Pacific across a narrow stretch of sand, I saw Dr. Wilhelm sauntering along the beach on what seemed a morning constitutional. Suddenly, I was aware that he was not alone. Slogging across the sand to meet him came a fantastic figure, a booted, bearded, fur-clad man with bulbous features and tangled masses of hair surmounted by a big, bright red beret. A coarse caricature, he appeared to me, of the well-known bust of the composer Wagner. One of the hippies. Some impulse, perhaps simply curiosity, moved me to bolt down the eggs and toast which the warily arriving housekeeper had brought me on a tray, and to rush out onto the beach through the storm door of my entryway, and join that strange colloquy shaping up under the striated silver-grey clouds, as Wilhelm closed with his odd visitor. My employer's stance seemed brusque and unfriendly as he listened to whatever the bearded man was saying to him. I slowed and approached the pair, as if on a casual stroll. Until I came up to them, all I could hear was the sibilance of surf hissing over the sands almost at our feet. "Good morning, Mr. Dorn," Wilhelm snapped, obviously not pleased to see me. "Perhaps you ought to meet Mr. Alonzo Waite, since he's our neighbor. Mr. Waite is the high priest, or whatever he calls himself, of that hippie bunch down the way." "I call myself nothing," the other responded quickly. "My disciples have awarded me the title of guru, or spiritual leader, since I have spent more time in mystic exercises than they. But I neither seek nor accept any preeminence among them. We are all fellow pilgrims on the sacred quest for truth." His voice was hollow, deep, strangely impressive, and his words, while eccentric, seemed more urbanely cultivated than I'd expected. "All very well, perhaps," Wilhelm put in testily. "But your quest for truth seems determined to interfere with mine. I am simply warning you, as I have warned you before, that your work with the dolphins is potentially very dangerous, to yourselves and others. You should give up these studies and release the beasts before great harm results." "And on what evidence do you base this remarkable prophecy?" Wilhelm inquired acidly. "Tell Mr. Dorn I've heard all this before." Waite's cavernous voice descended even deeper. "As you may know, the League for Spiritual Discovery has been working with mind-expanding substances, not drugs in the proper sense, that produce intuitions and perceptions unattainable to the ordinary brain. We are not of that group, but we too claim that such states are true ecstatic trances, comparable or superior to those that have always played such a vital part in all the Eastern religions, and which modern science would do well to recognize and investigate." "This is more Mr. Dorn's field than mine," Wilhelm said uneasily. "He's in parapsychology. I know nothing about such matters, but none of this sounds at all plausible to me." "But what has all this to do with dolphins?" I asked the bearded man. "Our dreams and visions lately have been troubled by the presence of great, white, menacing shapes, cutting across and blocking out the sacred color patterns and animated mandalas that lead us to greater spiritual understanding," Waite boomed. "These are vibrations emanating from the creatures you have penned here, which you call dolphins, but which we know by an older name. These creatures are evil, strong and evil. As your experiments have progressed, so have the disturbing manifestations intensified. These vibrations are terribly destructive, not only mentally, but physically. For your own good, I warn you to desist before it is too late." "If what we're doing upsets your pipe dreams," Wilhelm remarked with ill-concealed contempt, "why don't you move elsewhere and get out of range?" The tall, bearded man blinked and gazed into the distance. "We must remain and concentrate our psychic powers on combating the evil vibrations," he said quietly. "There are certain spiritual exercises and ceremonies we can undertake that may help curb or deflect the danger for a while. In fact, we are planning such a ceremony for tonight. But the only sure way to safety is for you to release these ancient, wickedly wise creatures, and to give up your experiment." Waite stood solemnly, staring out to sea, a grotesque, foreboding, and somehow dignified figure in his oversized beret and flapping fur robe. 5. "A scene right out of a Hollywood science fiction thriller," Wilhelm muttered angrily as he led me through the barn-like, high-ceilinged main laboratory and out a rear door. He couldn't seem to get the encounter on the beach out of his mind, and it bothered him more than I could well understand. As for me, I had put Waite down as just a typical California nut, though more intelligent than most, and doubted that we would have any real trouble with him. "You've seen our sound recording equipment, both atmospheric and underwater," Wilhelm said, finally changing the subject. "Now you must see where most of it is used, and where your own work will be concentrated." The back of the lab looked out over the beach. Near the water's edge stood a smaller windowless structure, long, low, and plastered with white cement like the others. Wilhelm led the way to it and opened its single heavy metal door with a key from his pocket. The inside was taken up mostly by a sunken tank that resembled a small indoor swimming pool. The narrow verge that surrounded the tank on 3 sides was cluttered with electrical control panels, headsets, and other paraphernalia connected with the main tape recording and computer banks in the big lab. The ocean side of the building consisted mostly of a sort of sea gate that could be opened on a cove communicating with the ocean itself, as I learned later, so that the water might be cleaned and freshened at need. Harsh fluorescent lamps played over the glittering surface of the pool, sending rippling whirls of reflected light into every corner of the room. There was a low hissing sound from the steam radiators run by thermostats that kept both the air and water temperatures constant and controllable. But none of this attracted my immediate attention, for here I was at last confronted with the subject of the experiment itself, a lithe, bulky yet graceful shape, mottled grey above, dirty white below, with a long saw-toothed snout and deep-set, intelligent eyes, hung motionless in the shallow water on its slowly fanning flippers. And not alone, for the dolphin shared its pool with Josephine Gilman, clad in a bright red bathing suit that set off her striking figure in an arresting manner. Indeed, I found myself staring more intently at Josephine than at her aquatic companion. "Hi." Josephine's greeting was bland, but suggested a veiled irony, as if she were conscious of my covert gaze. "Joe has been more or less living in this pool for the last 2.5 months, Dr. Wilhelm explained. The purpose is to get into complete rapport with Flip, that's the dolphin, and encourage any attempts at communication on his part." "Flip," Josephine interjected, "is short for Flipper, of course, the dolphin hero of that old movie and TV series that was one of the first signs showing popular awareness of the animal's intelligence." Joe laughed, heaving herself adroitly onto the tiled edge of the pool. The show was just a seagoing lassie, of course. She reached out for and wrapped herself snugly in a heavy terry-cloth towel. "Anybody for coffee? It's a bit chilly today for these early morning aquatics." As Joe served coffee from a sideboard silex, Wilhelm was priming me with data on Flip. He's a prime specimen of Tursiops truncata, though a bit smaller than average. About 6.5 feet, actually. The brain weighs an average of 1,700 grams, 350 grams more than the human brain, with comparable density of cell count. We've had this fellow for over a year now, and though he'll make every noise they're noted for, barks, grunts, clicks and scrapes and whistles, and even mimic human speech, we can't dope out a language pattern. Yet they must talk to each other. My first interest in dolphin biology was aroused by a report on sonar charts that Navy boats made near Ponape in the South Pacific. The charts showed orderly discipline in their undersea movements over a distance amounting to miles, and something more. A pattern or formation of mathematically precise movements that suggests either elaborate play or some sort of ritual. Maybe, I interrupted facetiously, they were practicing for the ceremony that so impressed Governor Grimble. Anyway, said Jo, putting aside her cup and straightening a strap on her bathing suit. In 10 weeks I haven't gotten to first base with Flip here, and now you're supposed to get us onto the proper wavelength. Also, you'll have to provide some hints about what to look for and concentrate on in telepathic communication attempts. Frankly, I don't put much faith in it, but if Fred wants to try, I'll cooperate with as few mental reservations as possible. Remembering a passage from Dr. Lilly's Pioneer book, I asked Wilhelm, "Have you implanted electrodes in the beast's brain for pleasure stimulus experiments?" "We're beyond all that," Wilhelm replied impatiently. "It's been known for years that they'll learn the most complex reaction patterns almost immediately to achieve the stimulus, far beyond what any lower animal can manage. Besides, it's crude. A kind of electrical masturbation, or LSD like our friends out there on the beach favor. It doesn't show a proper respect for our basic equality with the dolphin, or his superiority over us, as the case may be." While this conversation progressed, my attention was gradually distracted by the animal itself, floating in the pool beside us. It was obviously following our talk, though I assumed without any degree of verbal comprehension. The single visible eye, set in a convoluted socket behind the rather menacing snout, moved from one to the other of us with lively interest. I even caught myself reading human expressions into it. Proprietary interest when turned on Josephine Gilman, tolerant amusement in regard to Dr. Wilhelm, and toward myself, what? Resentment, animosity, jealousy? What fancies were these I was weaving under the glaring lights of a scientific laboratory? "You'll have to get better acquainted with Flip," Wilhelm was saying. "If you're to help us learn to interpret dolphinese, you and he should become good friends." There was a commotion in the water. Flip turned abruptly to his left and swam off semi-submerged, emitting as he did so the first dolphin sound I'd ever heard, a shrill whistle of derision. 6. That evening after dinner, Josephine Gilman and I walked on the beach under a moon that shone only intermittently through scurrying clouds. Dr. Wilhelm was in his office writing up notes, and the housekeeper cook, last to leave of the staff each evening, was just rattling off toward San Simeon in the Institute's Land Rover. I found that I didn't know what to make of my feelings toward Jo. When I had seen her in the pool with the dolphin that morning, she had attracted me intensely, seeming in her proper element, but at dinner, in a frilly cocktail gown that somehow didn't suit her, she once more repelled me with her sallow skin, her bulging, humorless eyes. "Tomorrow the hypnosis sessions are to begin," I reminded her, as we paced slowly toward the surf's edge. "Are you sure you really want to undergo this? After all, you say you have no confidence in this approach, and that may inhibit your response to it." "I'll do as Fred thinks best, and I'll assume what he assumes, temporarily at least. I've become quite good at that, within limits. Did you know he once wanted me to marry him? That's where I drew the line, though." "No." I was embarrassed by her abrupt interjection of personal matters. "I think it was for convenience mostly. His first wife had died. We were working together. We shared the same interests. Even the fact that we had to stay here together overnight, to watch over the work 24 hours a day when that was necessary, well, it would have made things easier, but I told him no." "How did you first become interested in dolphinology? Is that the word?" I sought to change the subject. We had reached the point beyond which the waves retreated, leaving streaks of hissing, iridescent foam half visible in the gloom. "Actually, I've always been fascinated by the sea and things that live under water. I used to spend half my time at the aquarium back home in Boston, either there or down at the harbor." "Your family comes from Boston?" "Not originally. My father was in the Navy, and we lived there a long time, ever since Mother died. His family came from a run-down seaport mill town called Innsmouth, up past Marblehead. The Gilmans are an old family there. They were in whaling and the East Indies trade as far back as 200 years ago, and I suppose that's where my oceanographic interests come from. Do you often go back there? I've never ever been there, strange as it seems. The whole place almost burned to the ground back in the 1920s, before I was born. My father said it was a dead, depressing place, and made me promise years ago to keep away from it. I don't know exactly why. That was just after his last trip there, and on his next voyage he was lost overboard from a destroyer he commanded. No one ever knew how. It was calm weather. Weren't you ever curious about why he warned you away from, what was it, Innsville? I faltered. Yes, especially after he died. I looked up the newspapers from around the time of the big fire. The Boston libraries had almost nothing else on Innsmouth, and found one story that might have had some bearing. It was full of preposterous hints about how the people of Innsmouth had brought back some sort of hybrid heathen savages with them from the South Seas years ago, and started a devil worship cult that brought them sunken treasure and supernatural power over weather. The story suggested that the men had interbred with their Polynesian priestesses or whatever, and that was one reason why people nearby shunned and hated them. I thought of Josephine's swarthy skin and strange eyes, and wondered. We had covered a mile or more from the Institute, and were suddenly aware that the darkness ahead was laced with a faint flickering, as of a fire on the beach to the south. At the same time, a sort of low mumble or glutinous chant became audible from the same direction. All at once, a high, hysterical wail, reverberating in shocking ecstasy, burst forth on the night air, prolonging itself incredibly, now terror-stricken, now mockingly ironic, now mindlessly animal, rising and falling in a frenzy that suggested only delirium or insanity raised to the highest possible human or inhuman pitch. Without thought or volition, Josephine and I found ourselves clinging together and kissing with an abandon that echoed the wild caterwauling down the beach. The hippies, it seemed, were holding their promised ritual to exorcise the evil influence of the sinister creatures from the sea. 7. The next few days can most conveniently be summarized through extracts from the clinical journal which I began to keep from the outset of our attempt to establish telepathic contact with the dolphin Flip through hypnosis of a human subject. April 20th. This morning, I placed Josephine under light hypnosis, finding her an almost ideally suggestible subject. I implanted post-hypnotic commands intended to keep her alert and concentrating on the dolphin's mind to catch any message emanating from it. After I awakened her, she went back into the tank with Flip and spent the rest of the day there, playing the number games they have devised together. It is remarkable to observe how devoted the animal is to her, following her about the pool and protesting with loud barking and bleating whenever she leaves it. Flip will accept his food, raw whole fish, only from her hands. I asked Dr. Wilhelm whether there was any danger from those wicked-looking, hundred-toothed jaws which snapped down on the fish like a huge, lethal pair of shears. He said no. In neither history nor legend has there ever been a report of a dolphin attacking or even accidentally injuring a human. Then he quoted something from Plutarch. His erudition is profound, if one-sided, which I looked up in the library later. Here it is. To the dolphin alone, beyond all other, nature has granted what the best philosophers seek, friendship for no advantage. April 22nd. Still no results. Wilhelm wants me to try deeper hypnosis and stronger suggestion. In fact, he proposed leaving Josephine in a trance for periods of a day or more, with just enough volition to keep her head above water in the tank. When I protested that this was dangerous, since in such a state she might well drown inadvertently, Wilhelm gave me an odd look and said, Flip wouldn't let her. April 25th. Today, in the absence of any progress whatsoever, I agreed to try Wilhelm's second-stage plan, since Joe agrees. I put her to sleep by the pool's edge while Flip watched curiously. I don't think this dolphin likes me, although I've had no trouble making friends with the others in the bigger tank up on the North Beach. After implanting in her subconscious the strongest admonitions to be careful in the water, I let her re-enter the pool for a few hours. Her demeanor, of course, is that of a sleepwalker or a comatose person. She sits on the lip of the pool or wades about it abstractedly. Flip seems puzzled and resentful that she won't play their usual games with him. When I was helping Joe out of the pool after an hour or so of this, the dolphin zoomed past at terrific speed, and I was sure he was about to snap at my arm, thus making me the first dolphin-bitten human in history. But he apparently changed his mind at the last moment and veered away, quacking and creaking angrily, his single visible eye glaring balefully. April 27th. Dr. Wilhelm wants to increase the period with Joe in the pool under hypnosis. This is because when she woke up yesterday, she said she remembered vague, strange impressions that might be telepathic images or messages. I am almost certain that these are pseudo-memories, created by her subconscious to please Dr. Wilhelm, and I have strongly protested any intensification of this phase of the experiment. Those hippie orgies on the beach south of here go on almost every night till all hours. The three of us are losing sleep and getting on edge, especially Joe, who tires easily after the longer periods under hypnosis. April 28th. Joe had an especially vivid impression of some sort of scenes or pictures transmitted to her during hypnosis after I brought her out of the trance this afternoon. At Wilhelm's suggestion, I put her under again to help her remember, and we taped some inconclusive question-and-answer exchanges. She spoke of a ruined stone city under the sea with weedy arches and domes and spires, and of sea creatures moving through the sunken streets. Over and over, she repeated a word that sounded like, "Oh, yeah." It's all imagination, I'm sure, plus memories of poems by Poe or cheap horror fiction, maybe even the story Wilhelm read us about the Gilbert Island porpoises and their king out of the west. Yet Wilhelm was excited, and so was Josephine when she woke up and heard the tape played back. Both of them wanted me to put her in a deep trance and leave her in the pool around the clock. I consider this to be a nonsensical idea and told them so. April 29th. This morning Wilhelm pressed me again. I told him I couldn't be responsible for what might happen, and he answered, "No, of course not. I am responsible for whatever goes on at this institute myself." Then he showed me a kind of canvas harness or breeches buoy affair he'd rigged up in the pool, securely anchored to the verge where Joe could be strapped and still move around without any danger of drowning under hypnosis. I gave in and agreed to try the idea for a while. April 30th. Everything went off without any difficulty, and at least Joe and Wilhelm are convinced that what they call her messages are getting sharper and more concrete. To me, what she recalls under light hypnosis is just nonsense or fantasy, mixed in perhaps with those odd rumors about her hometown, Innsmouth, which she told me about earlier. Nevertheless, the two of them want to keep it up another day or so, and I agreed, since no actual danger seems to be involved. 8. No danger involved. If, when I wrote those words, I'd had even an inkling of what I know now, I would have halted the experiment immediately. Either that or left this oceanside outpost on the edge of the unknown, threatened by fanatic superstition from the outside, and a stiff-necked scientific hubris from within. But though the hints were there, recognizable in hindsight, still at the time I saw nothing, felt nothing but a vague, unplaceable malaise, and so did nothing. and thus I must share the guilt for what happened. Late on the evening of April 30th, soon after I had written the journal entry quoted above, Dr. Wilhelm and I were roused from our rooms by the sound of a scream, which, though faint and muffled by distance, we at once recognized as Joe's voice, not the subhuman caterwauling of our drug-debauched neighbors. Ask me now why we had left Joe Gilman alone in the Dolphin's tank, and I must admit that it appears to be original negligence or inexcusable folly. But Wilhelm and I had stood watch over her alternately the night before, as she hung half-submerged in her canvas harness, and dreamed her strange dreams under the glare of the fluorescent tubes. The harness held her head and thorax well clear of the water, and Flip, lolling quiescent in the tank, seemed to drowse too, though dolphins never sleep, since they must keep surfacing to breathe, like whales. Thus, this second night, at her own prior urging, Wilhelm and I had knocked off for dinner, and then sought some relaxation in our rooms. The scream which jolted us both out of a vague torpor induced by loss of sleep came at about 10 p.m. Dr. Wilhelm's room was nearer the main lab than mine. Thus, despite his greater age and bulk, he was ahead of me in reaching the heavy iron door of the beachside aquarium. As I approached the building, I could see him fumbling with the lock, his hands trembling. I was taken aback when he wheezed breathlessly at me over his shoulder. "Wait here." I had no choice, for he slipped inside and clanged the door shut behind him. The lock operated automatically, and since only Wilhelm and the chief lab technician, now miles away in San Simeon, had keys, I was forced to obey. I can recall and relive in minute detail the agony and apprehension of that vigil, while the sibilant surf plied up only yards away under a freshening wind, and the half-full moon shone down with an ironic tranquillity upon that silent, windowless, spectrally white structure. I had glanced at my watch as I ran along the beach, and can verify that it was almost exactly 10 minutes after Wilhelm had slammed the door that he again opened it, slowly, gratingly, the aperture framing, as always, a rectangle of harsh, glaring light. "Help me with her," Wilhelm muttered from within, and turned away. I stepped inside. He had removed Joe Gilman's limp form from the water, and had wrapped it in several of the capacious beach robes that were always at hand near the tank. Glancing beyond the inert figure, I was startled to see Joe's canvas harness strung out, dismembered across the winking surface of the water, and even part of her bright red bathing suit, which seemed entangled with the shredded canvas. The shadowy shape of the dolphin Flip I glimpsed too, fully submerged and strangely quiescent in a far corner of the pool. "To her room," Wilhelm murmured as we lifted Joe. Somehow, staggering and sidling in the shifting sand, we gained the dormitory building, groped open the door, and stumbled through Joe's apartment. I had never been inside, but Wilhelm seemed to know his way, finally dropping her muffled body unceremoniously onto the narrow, folding bed. "I'll call a doctor," I mumbled, lurching toward the door. "No, don't," Wilhelm rapped, adjusting the dim bedside lamp. "She's not really hurt. As a zoologist, I'm doctor enough myself to know that. Bring a tape recorder from the lab. I think she's still hypnotized, and she may be able to tell us what happened." "But you saw—" I began breathlessly. "I saw only what you saw," he grated, glaring at me through lenses that picked up the muted glow of the bed lamp. "She was clinging to the edge of the pool when I went in there, only partly conscious, out of her harness, and get the tape machine, man." Why I obeyed blindly I still do not understand, but I found myself again blundering along the beach, Wilhelm's keyring in my hand, and then fumbling a portable tape recorder from the orderly storage cabinets of the main laboratory. When I lugged the machine back to Josephine's room, I found that Dr. Wilhelm had somehow maneuvered her into an incongruous frilly lounging robe and gotten her under the bed covers. He was massaging her wrists with a mechanical motion and scanning her face anxiously. Her eyes were still closed, her breathing harsh and irregular. "Is she in hypnosis or shock?" he inquired edgily. "Either. Or perhaps both, I shot back. At this point, the symptoms would be similar. Then set up the machine. It soon appeared that the deep mesmeric state into which I had placed Joe Gilman that morning still held. I was able to elicit responses from her by employing the key words that I used to trigger the state of trance, so easily invoked these days as to be almost disconcerting. "Joe, can you hear me? Tell us what happened to you," I urged her gently. The colour began to return to her face. She sighed deeply and twisted under the bedclothes. For what happened next? I have the evidence not only of my own recollections, but a transcription typed up next day from the tape machine, whose microphone Dr. Wilhelm now held beside her pillow, with tense expectancy. This is a summary, omitting some of her repetitions and the urgings on our part, of what we heard muttered by the bruised lips of that comatose woman writhing uneasily on her cot in a dimly lit room beside the glittering, moon-drenched Pacific, close on to midnight of May Eve. Must get out and unify the forces. Those who wait in watery Allier, those who walk the snowy wastes of Leng, whistlers and lurkers of sullen Kadath, all shall rise. All shall join once more in praise of great Cthulhu, of Shub-Niggurath, of him who is not to be named. You will help me, fellow breather of air, fellow holder of warmth, store of seed for the last sowing and the endless harvest. Unpronounceable name, possibly Yar-Nathle, shall celebrate our nuptials. The weedy labyrinth shall hold our couch. The silent strutters in darkness will welcome us with high debauch and dances upon their many-segmented legs. Their ancient glittering eyes are gay, and we shall dwell amidst wonder and glory forever. The speaker gasped and seemed to struggle to awaken. My apprehensions had crystallized into certainty. "She's hysterical," I whispered. No, not hysterical," Dr. Wilhelm hissed, trying in his elation to keep his voice subdued. "Not hysterical. She's broken, though. Don't you see what this is? Don't you see that she's echoing ideas and images that have been projected to her? Can't you understand? What we've just heard is her attempt to verbalize in English what she's experienced today. The most astonishing thing any human being has ever experienced. Communication from another intelligent species." 9. Of the rest of that night, I remember little. The twin shocks of Joe Gilman's hysterical seizure, for so I interpreted not only her unconscious ranting, but also the initial scream and her struggle out of the restraining apparatus, plus the unreasoning interpretation placed upon these events by my employer, served to unnerve me to the extent that, when Joe sank gradually into normal slumber, I excused myself to Dr. Wilhelm and reeled off to my own room a little before midnight, for 10 hours of uninterrupted, if not undisturbed, sleep. It was a distinct surprise to me when I joined the others at staff luncheon the next day, to find that a reticence amounting almost to a conspiracy of silence had already grown up in regard to the events of the preceding night. Joe, although pale and shaken, referred to what had happened as her LSD trip before the other staff members, and Dr. Wilhelm merely spoke of an abortive phase of Operation Dolphin which had been given up. In any event, Joe completely abandoned her previous intimacy with Flip. Indeed, I never once saw her in the aquarium building again, at least not until a certain climactic occasion, the facts about which I almost hesitate to affirm at this juncture. Suddenly, all research efforts seemed to be shifted hastily to the crowded pens of young dolphins on the North Beach, and I was called upon to interpret sonar charts and graphs recording patterns of underwater movement that might, or might not, indicate a telepathic herd communion between individuals and groups of animals, both free and in captivity. This, although a plausibly rational shift in experimental emphasis, somehow failed to convince me. It seemed merely a cover-up, on the part of Josephine as well as Wilhelm, masking a fear, an uncertainty, or some unsurmised preoccupation I failed to grasp. Perhaps these further extracts from my journal will make clear my uneasiness during this period. May 7th. Joe is still distant and evasive with me. Today, as we worked together coding patterns of dolphin movement for the computer, she suddenly fell silent, stopped work, and began to stare straight ahead. When I passed my hand in front of her face, I confirmed that her stare was unfocused, and she had actually fallen into a trance again, from which I was able to awaken her with the same keywords we used when she was regularly under hypnosis. I was horrified, for such involuntary trances may well be a symptom of deep psychic disturbance, for which I can only blame myself for giving in to Dr. Wilhelm's rash obstinacy. When she woke up, however, she would admit only to having a headache and dozing off for a moment. I did not press the issue then. May 8th. The above entry was written in the late afternoon. Since Jo seemed herself at dinner, I determined to go to her room later for a serious talk about the dangerous state into which she has fallen. But when I reached the door of her apartment, I was surprised to hear voices, as it seemed, in muttered conversation inside. I stood there for a few moments, irresolute whether to knock or not. Suddenly, I realized that although what I heard was divided into the usual give-and-take exchanges of conversation with pauses and variations in the rhythm and tempo of the participating voices, in actuality the timbre was that of only one speaker, Josephine Gilman herself. May 10th. I still cannot believe that what Jo said on the tape after her so-called hysterical seizure was really a remembered telepathic transmission from Flip. And despite what Dr. Wilhelm said that night, I don't know whether he still believes it either. I've studied the transcript over and over, and think I've found a clue. Something about one of the phrases she spoke seemed hauntingly familiar. Their ancient, glittering eyes are gay. Recalling Wilhelm's remarkable memory, I mentioned it to him, and he agreed immediately. Yes, it's from Yeats. I recognized that almost at once. But that means the so-called message, or part of it at least, must have come from her own subconscious memory of the poem. Perhaps. But after all, it was Yeats who wrote the line about that dolphin-torn, that gong-tormented sea. Perhaps he's their favourite poet. This flippancy irritated me. Dr. Wilhelm, I answered angrily. Do you really believe that that tape was a telepathic transmission from Flip? He sobered. I don't know, Dawn. Maybe we'll never know. I thought so at first, but perhaps I was carried away. I almost hoped so. It was a pretty unsettling experience. But one thing I do know. You were right. That particular line of approach is too dangerous, at least with a subject as highly strung as Jo. Perhaps we can devise a safer way to resume the research with hypnosis later. But just now, I don't see how. We're only lucky that she didn't suffer any real harm. We don't know that either, I replied. She started hypnotizing herself. Wilhelm didn't answer. May 20th. For over a week, I have not observed Jo fall into one of her trances in the daytime. However, she always retires early, pleading exhaustion, so we don't know what may go on at night. Several times I've deliberately paused outside her door during the evening, and once I thought I heard that strange muffled conversation again, but softer or more distant. The research is now mechanical and curiously artificial. I don't see that we're accomplishing anything, nor is there any special need for me to be here at all. The old enthusiasm and vigor seem to have gone out of Wilhelm too. He has lost weight and appears older, apprehensive, as if waiting for something. May 24th. I sat late on the glassed-in patio last night, looking out toward the ocean, which was invisible since there was no moon. At about 9 o'clock, I thought I saw something white moving down by the water's edge, proceeding south in the general direction of the main lab. Curiously disturbed, I followed. It was Jo, of course, either under hypnosis or walking in her sleep. Here indeed was a scene from a horror film for Wilhelm to snort at. I took her arm and was able to guide her back to the dormitory building. The door to her apartment was open, and I put her to bed without resistance. However, when I tried to awaken her by the usual mesmeric methods, I failed. After a while, though, she seemed to fall into ordinary slumber, and I left, setting the lock on the hall door to catch automatically. Wilhelm was working late in his study, but I could see no reason to tell him about this incident. I shall probably not tell Jo either, since it might upset her nerves even more. I realize that I have become extremely fond of her since her LSD trip, in a tender, protective way, unlike my initial physical attraction for her. And this knowledge makes me recognize, too, that something must be done to help her. All I can think of is to call in a psychiatrist, but Wilhelm has already denied the need for this, and I know Jo will follow his lead. I must keep alert for more evidence to convince the pair of them that such a step is urgently indicated. For the past few weeks our hippies have abated their nocturnal ceremonies, but last night, after I left Jo's room, I could hear that inhuman chanting and shouting start up and see from my patio the reflections from their distant fire on the beach. Again, I did not sleep well. 10. It was past mid-June, with no change in the tense but tenuous situation at the Institute, when I had my momentous interview with the hippie guru, Alonzo Waite. The moon shone brightly that evening, and I sat as usual on my glass-fronted patio, nursing a last brandy and trying to put my thoughts and ideas into some order for the 100th time. Jo Gilman had retired early, and Dr. Wilhelm had driven into town for some sort of needed supplies, so I was in effect alone in the Institute. Perhaps Waite knew this somehow, for he came unerringly up the beach to my door, his fur cloak flapping dejectedly around his shanks, even though my apartment showed no light. I rose rather hesitantly to admit him. He seated himself in a canvas chair, refused brandy, and abstractedly removed the soiled red beret from his unshorn locks. In the faint glow of the hurricane lamp I had lit, his dark eyes were distant and withdrawn. I wondered whether he were under the influence of drugs. "Mr. Dawn," my visitor began, in the resonant tones I well remembered. "I know that you, as a man of science, cannot approve or understand what my companions and I are trying to do. Yet, because your field is exploration of the lesser-known aspects of the human mind, I have hopes that you may give me a more sympathetic hearing than Dr. Wilhelm has done. I, too, am a scientist, or was. Don't smile. A few years ago, I was assistant professor in clinical psychology at a small school in Massachusetts called Miskatonic University, a place you've possibly never even heard of. It's in an old colonial town called Arkham, quite a backwater, but better known in the days of the Salem witch trials. Now, extravagant as the coincidence may seem, if it is really a coincidence, I knew your co-worker Josephine Gilman by sight when she was a student there, though she would certainly not recognize me or even recall my name perhaps, in the guise I have now adopted. He shrugged slightly and glanced down at his eccentric get-up, then continued. You probably don't remember the scandal that resulted in my leaving my post, since it was hushed up and only a few sensational newspapers carried the item. I was one of those early martyrs to science, or to superstition if you like. But whose superstition? Fired for drug experiments with students in the first days of LSD research. Like others who became better known, and who sometimes exploited their discoveries for personal profit or notoriety, I was convinced that the mind-expanding drugs gave humanity an opening into a whole new world of psychic and religious experience. I never stopped to wonder in those days whether the experience would involve beauty alone or also encompass terror. I was a pure scientist then, I like to think, and to me whatever was good, or at least neutral raw material for the advancement of human understanding. I had much to learn. The drug underground at Miskatonic University was a little special. The school has one of the most outstanding collections of old books on out-of-the-way religious practices now extant. If I mention the medieval Arab treatise called the Necronomicon in its Latin version, you won't have heard of it. Yet the Miskatonic copy is priceless, one of only 3 acknowledged still to exist. The others are in the Harvard and Sorbonne libraries. These books tell of an ancient secret society or cult that believes the Earth and all the known universe were once ruled by vast alien invaders from outside space and time, long before man evolved on this planet. These entities were so completely foreign to molecular matter and protoplasmic life that for all intents and purposes they were supernatural and evil. Waite may once have been a college professor, I reflected, but judging by his portentous word choice and delivery, he would have made an even better old-time Shakespearean actor or revival preacher. His costume helped the effect, too. At some point, the bearded guru continued, these usurpers were defeated and banished by even stronger cosmic opponents who, at least from our limited viewpoint, would appear benevolent. However, the defeated old ones could not be killed, nor even permanently thwarted. They live on, imprisoned, but always seeking to return and resume their sway over the space-time universe, pursuing their immemorial and completely unknowable purposes. These old books record the lore that has been passed on to man from human and pre-human priesthoods that served these imprisoned deities, which constantly strive to mold and sway the thoughts of men by dreams, moving them to perform the rites and ceremonies by means of which the alien entities may be preserved, strengthened, and at last released from their hated bondage. All this goes on even today, and has influenced half the history of human science and religion in unacknowledged ways. And of course, there are rival cults that seek to prevent the return of the old ones, and to stymie the efforts of their minions. To be brief, the visions induced by LSD in the Miskatonic students, together with the results of experiments and ceremonies we learned from the old books, confirmed the reality of this fantastic mythology in a very terrible way. Even now I could not be persuaded to tell any living person some of the things I have seen in my visions, nor even to hint at the places my spirit has journeyed during periods of astral detachment. There were several disappearances of group members who dared too much, and several mental breakdowns accompanied by certain physical changes that necessitated placing the victim in permanent, solitary confinement. These occurrences, I assure you, were not due to any human agency whatsoever, no matter what the authorities may have chosen to believe. Though there was no evidence of foul play, the group was discovered and expelled, and I lost my job. After that, some of us came here and formed a community dedicated to thwarting the efforts of evil cultists to free the great old ones, which would mean, in effect, the death or degradation of all men not sworn to serve them. This is the aim of our present efforts to achieve spiritual knowledge and discipline through controlled use of hallucinogenic agents. Believe me, we have seen more than enough of the horrors connected with these matters, and our sympathies are all on the other side. Unfortunately, there are other groups, some of them right here in California, working in parallel ways to effect directly opposite results. An interesting story, I put in impatiently, disgusted by what I regarded as insane ramblings. But what has all this to do with our research here, and the fact that you knew Miss Gilman as a college student? Josephine's family comes from Innsmouth. Waite rumbled forebodingly. That blighted town was once one of the centers of this cosmic conspiracy. Before the Civil War, mariners from Innsmouth brought back strange beliefs from their South Pacific trading voyages. Strange beliefs, strange powers, and strange, deformed Polynesian women as their brides. Later, still stranger things came out of the sea itself in response to certain ceremonies and sacrifices. These creatures, half-human and half-amphibians of unknown batrachian strains, lived in the town and interbred with the people there, producing monstrous hybrids. Almost all the Innsmouth people became tainted with this unhuman heritage, and as they grew older, many went to live underwater in the vast stone cities built there by the races that serve great Cthulhu. I repeated the strange name falteringly. Somehow it rang a bell in my memory. All this was oddly reminiscent, both of what Jo had told me and of her delirious words on the tape, which Wilhelm half believed represented a message from the mind of an undersea race. Cthulhu, Waite repeated sepulchrally, is the demonic deity imprisoned in his citadel amidst the pre-human city of Rillier, sunken in mid-Pacific somewhere by the power of his enemies eons ago, asleep but dreaming forever of the day of release, when he will resume sway over the earth. And his dreams over the centuries have created and controlled those undersea races of evil intelligence who are his servants. "You can't mean the dolphins," I exclaimed. "These and others, some of such aspect that only delirious castaways have ever seen them and lived. These are the sources of the legendary hydras and harpies, Medusa and mermaids, Scylla and Circe, which have terrified human beings from the dawn of civilization and before. Now you can guess why I've constantly warned Dr. Wilhelm to give up his work, even though he is nearer success than he realizes. He is meddling in things more terrible than he can well imagine when he seeks communication with these deep ones, these minions of the blasphemous horror known as Cthulhu. More than this, the girl through whom he seeks this communication is one of the Innsmouth Gilmans. No, don't interrupt me. I knew it as soon as I saw her at the university. The signs are unmistakable, though not far advanced yet. The bulging, ichthyic eyes, the rough skin around the neck where incipient gill openings will gradually develop with age. Some day, like her ancestors, she will leave the land and live underwater as an ageless amphibian in the weedy cities of the deep ones, which I glimpse almost daily, in my visions and in my nightmares alike. This cannot be coincidence. There is manipulation somewhere in bringing this girl, almost wholly ignorant of her awful heritage, into intimate, unholy contact with a creature that can end what slim chances she may ever have had of escaping her monstrous genetic destiny. 11. Although I did my best to calm Alonzo Waite by assuring him that all attempts to establish hypnotic rapport between Jo and Flip had ended, and that the girl had even taken an aversion to the animal, I did not tell him any of the other puzzling aspects of the matter, some of which seemed to fit in strangely with the outlandish farrago of superstition and hallucination that he had been trying to foist upon me. Waite did not seem much convinced by my protestations, but I wanted to get rid of him and think matters over again. Obviously, the whole of his story was absurd, but just as obviously he believed it, and if others believed it too, as he claimed, then this might explain in some measure the odd coincidences and the semi-consistent pattern that seemed to string together so many irrelevancies and ambiguities. But after Waite left, I decided that there were still pieces missing from the puzzle. Thus, when Jo Gilman knocked on my door a little before 11 o'clock, I was not only surprised — she never came out at night anymore since her sleepwalking episode — but glad of the opportunity to ask her some questions. I couldn't sleep and felt like talking, Jo explained, with an air of rather strained nonchalance as she settled in the same chair Waite had used. I hope I'm not disturbing you. She accepted a brandy and soda and lit a cigarette. I had a sudden, detached flash of vision that saw this scene as a decidedly familiar one. Drinks and cigarettes. A girl in a dressing gown in the beachside apartment of a bachelor. But our conversation didn't fall into the cliché pattern. We talked of sonographs and neuron density, of supersonic vibrations, computer tapes, and the influence of water temperature on dolphin mating habits. I watched Jo carefully for any signs of falling into that auto-hypnotic state in which she held conversations with herself, but could see none. She seemed more herself than had been the case for many weeks. At the same time, I was annoyed to realize that I had become more conscious than before of the physical peculiarities which that idiot Waite had attributed to a biologically impossible strain in her ancestry. The conversation had been entirely prosaic, until I seized the opportunity of a moment of silence to ask one of the questions that had begun to intrigue me. When did you first hear about Dr. Wilhelm's studies, and how did you happen to come to work for him? It was right after my father was drowned. I had to drop out of graduate school back in Massachusetts and start making my own living. I had heard about Fred's research, and of course I was fascinated from the start, but I never thought of applying for a job here until my Uncle Joseph suggested it. Your father's brother? Yes, a funny little old fellow. I always thought when I was a child that he looked just like a frog. He spends about half the year at the old family place in Innsmouth and half in Boston. He seems to have all the money he needs, though I've never seen any of it. My father once asked him jokingly what he did for a living, and Uncle Joe just laughed and said he dove for Spanish doubloons. Anyway, a few weeks after I left school and came back to Boston, Uncle Joe showed me a story about Dr. Wilhelm's work with the dolphins. I think it was in the Scientific American. Joe knew of my studies in oceanography, of course, and he said he knew an authority in the field who would write me a good recommendation. It must have been a good one, all right, because in less than 6 weeks, here I was. That was over 2 years ago now. If Alonzo Waite needed a further link in his wild theory of conspiracy, here was perfect raw material. You know, Joe went on with apparent casual lightness, I told you a long time ago that Dr. Wilhelm asked me to marry him. That was more than 6 months ago. At the time, I thought it was a bad idea, but now I rather wish I had taken him up on it. Why? Afraid of becoming an old maid? I might have something to say about that one of these days. No. Her voice remained as calm and casual as before. The reason is that, dating from right around the time that Fred Wilhelm rescued me from my LSD trip in that dolphin tank, I've been pregnant. At least that's the timetable that the doctor in San Simeon has figured. 12. Then it's Fred? My remark sounded stupid, clumsy, like something that hypothetical beachside couple I'd imagined might be discussing in some tawdry charade illustrating California's vaunted new morality. Figure it out for yourself, Joe answered with a nervous laugh. It's either you or Fred. I don't remember a thing until I woke up the next morning feeling like a used punching bag. Wilhelm was alone with you for at least 10 minutes before he let me into the aquarium, and he was alone with you in your apartment after I went to bed 3 hours later. I never was alone with you that evening. That's what I assumed from what you both told me the next day. Besides, I never turned you down. Maybe only because you didn't ask me. Joe, I said, getting out of my chair, and didn't know what to say next. No, whatever it is, forget it, she murmured. Whatever you were going to say, it's too late. I've got to think in an entirely different frame of reference now. What are you going to do? I think I'm going to marry Fred. That is, if he's still interested. From there, we'll see. There's more now than just me to worry about, and that seems the right move, the only move, to start with. We didn't say much more. Jo felt drowsy all of a sudden, and I walked her back to her apartment. Afterward, I strolled on the beach. A brisk wind arose around midnight, and clouds covered what moon there was. I felt numb. I hadn't known, or any way admitted to myself, how I felt about Jo until now. I loved her too, but if Wilhelm, the old satyr, had made her pregnant while she was under hypnosis, then what she planned was probably best for all concerned. But how unlike Wilhelm such an act appeared. The gentlemanly, scholarly enthusiast, with his grandfatherly grey hair and amusing penguin shape. He might become infatuated with and propose to a young woman, especially someone who shared his enthusiasms. That was in character. But a dastardly attack like the one Joe suspected? He must be insane. I heard the Land Rover chugging up the sandy road. Dr. Wilhelm was returning. I'd find it hard to face him tomorrow. In fact, that might just be the best time for me to offer him my resignation, although I had no future prospects. Maybe I could get my old job back. At any rate, nobody needed me around here anymore. That much was crystal clear. I went back to my room and had several more brandies. Before I fell asleep, I became aware that the hippies were launching one of their wild orgies down on the South Beach. From what Waite had said, they were holding ceremonies to keep the nice, normal, sane world safe for nice, normal, sane people, if there were any left these days. 13. I don't think I'd slept as much as an hour when something sent me bolt upright in bed, wide awake. It may have been a sound, or it may have been some sort of mental message. Ironic, since this was my field of study, that I had never observed, much less experienced, a fully convincing instance of telepathic communication. In any case, something was wrong, I was sure of that. And if my premonition proved right, I knew where to go to find it, the beach by the main laboratory. I dressed hurriedly and dashed out onto the shifting sands. The wind, now near gale force, had swept the clouds away from the sickle moon, which shone starkly on the beach and glared upon an ocean of crinkled tinfoil. I could see two figures moving toward the windowless building at the water's edge where Flip, the neglected subject of our old experiment, was still kept in isolation. They converged and entered the building together, after a moment's hesitation over the locks. As I dashed in pursuit, the gusty wind brought me snatches of the hippie ceremony. I made out drums and cymbals beaten wildly, as well as that same muffled chanting, and the high, floating wail of ecstasy, or terror, or both. The harsh white light of fluorescent tubes now streamed through the open door leading to the dolphin tank, and I heard another sound inside as I approached, the clank of machinery and the hum of an electric motor. Dr. Wilhelm was raising the sea gate on the ocean side of the building, the gate that was sometimes used to change the water in the tank, while Flip was held under restraint by the daytime lab assistants. No one could be holding him now. Was Wilhelm about to release the animal, to satisfy some vague and belated qualm of conscience? But as I panted up to the open door, I realized that more than this was afoot. In a momentary glimpse just before the storm cut out our power lines, I took in the whole unbelievable scene. The massive sea gate was fully raised now, allowing turbulent waves to surge into the floodlighted pool, and even to splash violently over its rim, inundating the observation deck and its elaborate equipment. The dolphin, pitting its powerful muscles against the force of the incoming water, was relentlessly beating its way out to sea. Of Dr. Wilhelm there was no sign, but perched on the broad, smooth back of the great sea beast itself, her naked body partly covered by her soaked, streaming hair, sat Josephine Gilman, bolt upright, bestriding her strange mount like the old Grecian design of the boy on the dolphin, that enigmatic emblem of the marriage of earth to ocean. Then the lights failed, but the waves pounded on, and the distant, delirious chanting reached a peak of hysteria that sustained itself incredibly, unendingly. I can recall no more. 14. Josephine's body was never found, nor was there any reason that I should have expected that it ever would be. When the lab crew arrived next morning, they repaired the power line and raised the sea gate again. Dr. Wilhelm's mangled body was caught beneath it. The gate had fallen when the power failed, and had crushed Wilhelm as he attempted to follow the fantastic pair he had released into the open sea. On the neat desk in Dr. Wilhelm's office, where I had first met Josephine Gilman on the evening of my arrival, lay a manila envelope addressed to me. It contained a brief letter and a roll of recording tape. I found the envelope myself, and I have not shown it to the police, who seem to believe my story that Wilhelm and Josephine were swept out to sea when the gate was accidentally raised during an experiment. This is what the letter said. Dear Dawn, when you read this, I shall be dead, if I'm lucky. I must release the two of them to go back to the ocean depths where they belong. For you see, I now believe everything that grotesque person Alonzo Waite told me. I lied to you once when you asked me whether I had implanted electrodes in the brain of the test dolphin. I did implant one electrode at an earlier stage of my work, when I was doing some studies on the mechanism of sexual stimulation in the animal. And when our experiments in telepathic communication seemed to be inconclusive, I was criminally foolish enough to broadcast a remote signal to activate that stimulus, in a misguided attempt to increase the rapport between the subject and the animal. This was on the afternoon of April 30th, and you can guess, reluctantly enough, what happened that evening. I assume full responsibility and guilt, which I will expiate in the only way that seems appropriate. When I got to the pool ahead of you that awful night, I saw at a glance what must have just occurred. Josephine had been ripped from her canvas sling, still hypnotized and badly mauled. Her suit was torn almost off her, but I wrapped her in a robe and somehow got her into bed without your guessing what had really happened. The hypnosis held, and she never realized either. After that, though, she was increasingly under telepathic contact and even controlled by that beast in the pool, even though she consciously and purposely avoided him. Tonight, when I got back from town, she told me about the baby, but in the middle of it she fell into the usual trance and started to walk out on the beach. I locked her in her room and sat down to write this, since you have a right to know the truth, although there is nothing more that can be done after tonight. I think we both love Josephine, each in our own way, but now it is too late. I must let her out to join her own. She was changing, and when the baby is born, well, you can imagine the rest. I myself would never have believed any of this, except for the tape. Play it, and you'll understand everything. I didn't even think of it for a couple of weeks, fool that I was. Then I remembered that all during the time Joe spent hypnotized in the pool with the dolphin, I had ordered the microphones left open to record whatever might happen. The tapes were automatically filed by date next day, and had never been monitored. I found the reel for April 30th and copied the part that I enclose with this letter. Goodbye, and I'm sorry. Frederick C. Wilhelm. Many hours passed, hours of stunned sorrow and disbelief, before I dared bring a tape machine to my room and listen to the recording Wilhelm had left me. I considered destroying the reel unheard, and afterward I did erase the master tape stored in the main laboratory. But the need to know the truth, a scientific virtue that is sometimes a human failing, forced me to listen to the accursed thing. It meant the end for me of any peace of mind or security in this life. I hope that Joe and Flip have found some measure of satisfaction in that strange alien world so forebodingly described by the Guru Waite, and that Frederick Wilhelm has found peace. I can neither look for nor expect either. This is what I transcribed from that tape after many agonizing hours of replaying. The time code indicates that it was recorded at about 9:35 on the evening of April 30th, a scant few minutes before Josephine's agonized scream sent Wilhelm and me dashing belatedly to rescue her from that garishly illuminated chamber where the ultimate horror took place. My beloved, my betrothed, you must help me. I must get out and unify the forces. Those who wait in watery Rilliere, those who walk the snowy wastes of Leng, whistlers and lurkers of Salon Kadath, all shall rise, all shall join once more in praise of great Cthulhu, of Shub-Niggurath, of him who is not to be named. You shall help me, fellow breather of air, fellow holder of warmth, another storer of seed for the last sowing and the endless harvest. Yarnath Lay shall celebrate our nuptials, the weedy labyrinth shall hold our couch, the silent stratas in darkness will welcome us with high debauch and dances upon their many-segmented legs. Their ancient, glittering eyes are gay, and we shall dwell amidst wonder and glory forever. Merely a repetition, you say. Merely an earlier version of that meaningless rant that Josephine repeated an hour later under hypnosis in her bedroom, a garbled outpouring of suppressed fragments and fears from the subconscious mind of one who unreasoningly dreaded her family background in a shunned, decadent seaport a continent away. I wish I could believe that too, but I cannot. For these wild words were spoken not by a mentally unbalanced woman in deep hypnotic trance, but in the quacking, bleating, inhuman tones that are the unmistakable voice of the dolphin itself, alien servant of still more alien masters, the deep ones of legend, pre-human and perhaps soon post-human intelligences, behind whose bland, benign exterior lurks a threat to man which not all man's destructive ingenuity can equal or avert.
If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time.